Okay, welcome back to the channel. I'm One Kenobi. In the first part of this video, I'm going to show you how I like to weather vehicles with pastel chalk. And as you can see here, I'm just slopping it on with a heavy mix of turpenoid. And I'll use different shades. And really I like to think of this not as an additive process, but as a subtractive process. So it's a matter of putting it on and then starting to remove it little bit by little bit. Of course, I'll use a heat gun to sort of speed up the process. And here we are now just scraping away. To remove the material, I will use a coarse brush or Q-tips. I will use different shades of chalk to create the effect of dirt, different shades of grays and sand colors. It's a good idea if you have too much to just go ahead and either dampen your brush in a little bit of the turpenoid or your Q-tip, and that helps lift it off a bit easier. So I'm just continuing to move it around and lift it off. Scrape it away. So to create a dirty effect, I don't just stick with one shade or even a light version of colors. I like to have contrast between dark and light, and that really creates the effect of the sort of complexity of dirtiness that we expect to see. So I'll add some dark grays, some blacks. So all pastel colors will look different whether they're dried or they're wet. So it's important to get a real sense of how it's going to look. You're going to need to make sure that you are either allowing the pastel chalk to dry, which means that the turpenoid has evaporated, or you've heated it up with a heat gun to sort of speed up the effect. Either way, you're going to want to see what it looks like dried before you can make decisions about what to do next. Now I'm moving on to one of my favorite effects, which is to splatter either thinned down black oil paint or thinned down black pastel chalk. And this gives a wonderful effect of contrast, and I can either leave it or I can remove it very easily. And one of the great ways to sort of cover it up is to, again, go over it a little bit with some of the pastel chalk, and it just helps it blend in. Now here we are at the front of the vehicle, and as you can see, I'm working with quite a few different shades here, and I'm trying to be careful to blend them just slightly while at the same time maintaining their own sort of color integrity. It's very easy to get carried away and end up blending everything together to just make one color. Again, that's not what we want. What we want is contrast. You'll notice also that when you apply the chalks, that as you apply them with the thinner, there's a little bit of a hard edge, and so I like to soften up that hard edge sometimes. Sometimes the hard edge between colors can actually look pretty cool. So now I'm going to scrape a toothpick against the pastel chalk, and this will create some scratches. Many of my references showed this vehicle being put through its paces in a forest. And so I like to imagine that branches and all kinds of other rocks and so forth are scratching up against this vehicle, so I think scratches would be appropriate. And in some cases, the scratches may have been a bit heavy-handed. So here I am just softening them up a bit with an extra layer of chalk. Okay, now I'm going to take some black oil paint and I'm just going to run it on the higher parts of the contours. And you can see here I'm blending it with a Q-tip to soften it. And I find that this actually creates a really interesting weathering effect. It's sort of the reverse of dry brushing highlights. In a sense, I'm actually dry brushing, if you will, low lights, if that's a word, darker colors rather than lighter colors. And this is really very much for a weathering effect, not for any sort of scale effect. Okay, now that the lower section is done, I'm working the weathering effects further up the vehicle. I always want to start at the very bottom for several reasons. It's where the most dirt accumulates and moves to, as well as being a great place to just sort of experiment, try things out. If I make too many major mistakes with the weathering, it's likely not going to be seen too much at the bottom. As I go further up the vehicle, I want to sort of go a little bit easier on the weathering. This is a vehicle that was really not involved in any sort of conflicts at this point, certainly not with this paint scheme. So I want to go a little bit light on the weathering. So here I am again, just adding the pastels, not being too concerned about how it looks right now. I'm really trying to get a lot of the dirt effect in these little tight spots where it would be very easy for it to collect. Okay, now I'm returning to the splatter effect with the thinned oil wash, and I'm trying to concentrate it on these surfaces here to sort of create a bit of contrast between the light pastel and the dark new splatter effect. So there's a couple of ways to look at this. I could look at it both as just sort of a scale effect, where I'm adding different tones in each of these colors. On the other hand, I'm also adding weathering effects, right? So these are areas that maybe the crew would be walking around. They might have dirt on their boots and they're kicking it up onto the vehicle. And now here's the finished vehicle. I'm very proud with how it turned out. I hope you've enjoyed following along my videos. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. And of course, thank you for watching, and please hit subscribe if you'd like to follow along in future builds. My next build is going to be an M113 by AFV Club, and I hope you will join me for those videos. Thanks again. Take care.